Well, good evening, Gateway Life Groups. I hope you're really well, and I hope that you're going to have a great evening together. Let me briefly summarise what I said on Sunday as best I can. So I talked about a question of identity, the question of who am I and how do I know? How do I know who I am? And I talked about three different ways of constructing our identity, three different ways to come into a conclusion about that question. Firstly, the temptation that all of us have to base our identity on who we are on other people's opinions of us, other people's opinions of whether we're succeeding, of whether we're a good person, whether we're kind, all of these different things. I talked secondly about the I decide, and that's a real cultural push for our generation, particularly for younger people, and you might be wanting to think about this a bit if you are a parent or work with young people in terms of them. And I decide is about finding your own feelings, finding what you think authentically on the inside and trying to express that and trying to build an identity on that, and then comparing that to a Christian identity, which is people who are made in the image of God and who are saved by grace, saved by Jesus. And I will send out the slides to life group leaders. And on page 7 of the slides, I borrow from Andrew Bunt a critique of the others decide identity, and look at how that can really create crushing insecurity, because we never know if we're good enough in front of other people, how it can bring a lot of pressure into our lives where we're trying to perform in front of others, and also how it's very unstable because we can always make a mistake or fail with that identity. So that's page 7 on the slides if you want to just flash that up to remind people. On page 16 on the slides, I talk a little bit about a critique of the I decide, and this is a real cultural battle, I think, for many of us. Talk about how pressurized it is, because it's a really lonely journey trying to work out your own identity, as if you could do that. Secondly, how it can be confusing because you've got conflicting desires. Thirdly, how it's very unsupported. Only you get to decide, and so if things go wrong in your life, it's only you to blame. Talk about how it's unstable because our feelings are changing constantly. Talk about, fifthly, how it can cause unintended harm to others if we're just doing what was best for us. Other people fall by the wayside and could get damaged in that. And sixthly, how it's an inconsistent worldview. I talked about an example of, Martin Luther King being true to himself, but so was Adolf Hitler true to himself. And it isn't actually authenticity that makes us evaluate those men. It's something else, actually. It was a Christian foundation for Martin Luther King. And so just challenging that and just flagging up that it's really important that we don't allow that we don't just accept that. Talked about how when God brought his people out of Israel, he gave them an identity as his treasured possession, as his holy people, as his son. So that's what God calls Israel. And how similarly we receive an identity from God, not one that we have to get forced on us by others, not one that we have to find inside ourselves, but one that we received as a gift of grace. And it's firstly our humanity made in the image of God, and secondly our Christian identity, those who've been saved by the blood of Jesus, who died the death in our place and makes us holy, just like Israel was brought through the Exodus and made into God's holy people, so we are made holy. And finally, in the summary, Andrew Bunt just gives us 3 reasons why it's such an important and helpful way to understand our identity, because it releases us from the pressure of performance. Jesus performed, so we don't have to perform. It gives us freedom from insecurity, because we can be much more concerned with what God thinks, and we know that God is pleased with Jesus, and so we know that he loves us and he accepts us. And thirdly, it gives us opportunity to not just have our feelings squeezed out by others' opinions and not build our whole world on our own feelings, which is unhealthy, but to receive what God says about us and wrestle in prayer with him and with others in community when we have difficult feelings about God's way for us. And so just some questions really for you to think about. 3 very simple questions. There's a huge amount of working out for this. It's all very well to give you a kind of structure for understanding this, but of course it really matters when we come into thinking about what this means in our real everyday lives. So the first question I've got for you, and you probably want to discuss these in smallish groups. The first question is, what ways are you tempted to build an identity on others' decide, on other people's opinions? This is a temptation that most of us will face daily, if not weekly. Take an opportunity to talk about that. Try and really dig in. Where are you tempted to evaluate your identity, who you are, based on what other people might be thinking? Secondly, what ways are you tempted to build an identity on I decide? And I think this is hard because we're like fish in water. We don't really see this cultural water we're in. You might want to, just like I did with the Disney films, you might want to get into this if you're finding it tricky by talking about ways that you receive this message, about identifying where's this message coming to us. And if you can see that, you might think, just find in there just little elements that you might be tempted to believe. So really try and take some time to dig into that. And thirdly, how can you further accept, understand and build on the God-given identity that Christ has won for us? How can you receive the gift of grace rather than trying to perform, which both of the two other models make us want to do? A couple of months ago, I mentioned a prayer journaling that I do in the morning from the Examen, which is a kind of ancient Christian way of praying. And one thing that I think has really helped me to receive many more things as a gift from God is to begin the morning by listing, and I do this with pen and paper, listing all the things that I'm grateful for that God has given me that day. It just kind of helps keep me out of a performance mindset, and it helps me go into the presence of God with real gratitude. So maybe that's one way that we can take this received identity rather than this performance identity. You might think that meditating on verses like the opening of Ephesians 2, maybe you could chat among yourselves about other verses that speak about your God-given identity. Are there some there that you could share with one another to meditate on, to read through the next few weeks? This is not an easy question, so I would encourage you to really pray into this. As I said, I think it's a real cultural battleground, and I think it's one for our children and youth. And so we want to be praying for them, and you might want to take the opportunity to pray for them as you close, and of course pray for one another. So lots of deep stuff to discuss this week. 3 questions for you. Hope you have a great time and you meet with God. Thanks.